Thank you very much for this warm welcome. And I'm very excited to be here today in this panel discussion that we're going to have with key industry leaders, where we're going to be speaking about the potential of SAF to reduce aviation emissions today. As she already mentioned, I'm Laia Barbarà. I'm from the World Economic Forum, Clean Skies for Tomorrow initiative, where we contribute to this effort to decarbonize aviation with a particular emphasis on SAF. And it's a real pleasure to be here on the inauguration day of this first edition of Sustainable Skies in Farnborough, the home of the UK first powered flight. So we couldn't be in a better place. And I feel that talking about sustainable aviation fuels today is more important and relevant than ever, because as in-person events are starting to pick back and we're getting together again, we need more planes powered by SAF. So, quick background for those of you who may not be familiar with the Clean Skies for Tomorrow, who we are and what we do. We are a cross-value chain coalition with over 200 stakeholders, that is including airlines, airports, OEMs, SAF producers, corporate travelers, and also knowledge partners and think tanks. And we work across technology, policy, demand signals, and finance, and really trying to get the 360 perspective. We've really put forward an ambition statement where 100 companies have committed to 10% SAF by 2030 at the global level. And this is a very ambitious ambition statement, but this is really what it gets to drive home the message. Because this target of 10% SAF by 2030 at the global level would be the equivalent of 30 million tons of SAF, 60 million tons of CO2 per year saved, building at least 300 SAF plants, and requiring $200 billion of investment during the next decade. That would provide 300,000 green jobs. And actually, many of these organizations who have signed this ambition statement are here in the room today with us. So big thank you, because you're really driving the change and the energy transition in the aviation sector. So what do? We bring together stakeholders from along the aviation value chain to look at a number of different levers that need to be undertaken together at the same time. Because maybe 3 years ago, many would have said, well, we just need policy in place. But then the policy makers would say, well, we need to know that the producers are actually ready to produce SAF. And then the investors would come and say, well, that they need these strong policy mechanisms in place in order to de-risk investments. And so it is a chicken and egg circle that isn't going anywhere. So the message of today would be that we don't need a chicken or an egg anymore, but instead we want to break the eggs and make an omelette. We need to do a step forward, and it's time for action, and it's now. It has to start today. So in order for that to be achieved, we need to scale SAF, and we need to therefore start building SAF plants. And how? We need to unlock first new types of financing mechanisms in order to de-risk investments and address the various policy levers. And in parallel, we also need to stimulate the demand in order to share the cost of investing in these new technologies, which, in other words, we need corporate travelers to be willing to pay for this green premium. And all of these things, and I'm going to insist on that, need to start now, today, in order to make the change happen. Fortunately enough, though, today there's a clear momentum towards the decarbonization of aviation. In the past months, we've seen the industry setting a goal to be net zero by 2050 through IATA and ATAC. We've seen a lot of individual airlines and alliances setting their own commitments. And there's also growing interest from corporate travelers to claim and pay for their emissions. And we've also seen governments putting forward some national plans to decarbonize the aviation sector. And hopefully, we'll see a long-term aspirational goal as a result of the upcoming ICAO assembly. So the ambition is there. We now need action. And let's get back to the initial question. What is the real potential of SAF today, to have this action today? Of course, in this room, we all understand that hydrogen fuel planes or battery electric aircraft are not going to completely solve the aviation climate problem. But SAF is needed as the only proven solution today, as the only near-term solution. There is no doubt that the future of aviation is a sustainable one, just like any other transportation mode, in fact. And we're actually eager to maximize all the benefits that can derive from this transition. So now it's time to move beyond the willingness, it's time to move beyond the expressions of interest, and it's time for action. I'm sure that we'll hear from some speakers about the existing barriers that we face when we try to make SAF available or try to scale SAF. But I also hope to hear how to set a pathway for action now, starting today. And on a more personal note, I hope that we can stop seeing the decarbonization of aviation as something difficult or almost impossible. Because is aviation a hard-to-abate sector? Yes, it is, one of the 7 hardest-to-abate sectors. But do we have a plan to fly more sustainably? Yes, we do have a plan. Is the industry committed? Yes, the industry is willing, ready, and committed. And are there existing and proved technologies existing today? Yes, we have, for instance, SAF, but we just need to make sure that it is available. So, whilst mindful of the complexities that our job entails, we gotta remember that aircrafts take off against the wind. So I hope to hear some pragmatic optimism in this room, because the sector is doing its homework and we're actually making progress. So I'd like to thank the organizers for this first edition of Sustainable Skies. It is encouraging to see the growing interest and how crucial aviation remains for businesses, driving growth, but actually also this growing ambition to do so more sustainably. So we know that net zero by mid-century is going to be a very difficult challenge, but it's going to be an achievable one. I do really believe that, because there's another thing that we need to bear in mind is that as we tackle this sector, we're going to succeed or fail as one. So I do really believe that aviation is an industry that it's at its best when it embraces new technologies or new solutions like sustainable aviation fuels, and when it demonstrates a can-do attitude. These are, for me, the key words for today. So I do hope that in the spirit of collaboration and sustainability, we can show a can-do attitude in this first edition of Sustainable Skies and discuss how we can make progress in this very important topic as quickly as possible. So thank you very much for joining us today. Looking forward to hear from all of you. And I'm very excited now to start a panel discussion on SAF as a pathway to net zero. I'll call the speakers to join me on the stage, please, and I'll start introducing them as they come. So let me introduce you today's panelists. Firstly, we have Brian Stonehouse, the Director of Aviation, Sustainability and Risk at Shell Aviation. We also have Jean-Baptiste Jaran, Deputy Program Manager in Sustainable Fuels at Safran Helicopter Engines. Next, we have Giorgio Parolini, the Head of Advanced Fuels at the Department for Transport in the UK government. Brian Yutko, Vice President and Chief Engineer of Sustainability and Future Mobility at Boeing. Joining us virtually, we already have him on the line, we have Christoph Beutler, Head of Climate Policy at Climeworks. And finally, Jonathan Wood, Renewable Aviation Vice President for Europe, Middle East, and Africa at Neste. So let me join you. It's exciting to have this panel discussion with representatives from along the aviation value chain. We have SAF producers, but also policymakers and OEMs. So great to have you today. And I'd like to start with you, Brian, if I may. Good afternoon. If we think about SAF and the decade ahead, sustainable aviation fuels and its potential is actually not new. We've known them from quite a lot of time now. So what is the problem? How can we address the availability and scalability problem? And what are Shell's plans in doing so?
Thank you, and thank you for the invite to join today. Yeah, sustainable aviation fuels, as other renewable fuels, have been around in the industry for quite a long time now. I think the first flights were in the back end of the 2000s. They've been used, I think, now in over 300,000 flights around the world, and it'd be flying out of Los Angeles, San Francisco, Oslo, Stockholm, Heathrow now, Amsterdam Schiphol have likely had a flight that's had SAF on board because they're all in the hydrant systems of those airports and are regularly going to those airports. But the challenge is actually the volume that's available today is small. We're probably around about 200,000 tonnes as an industry in terms of production. Just to give people an idea, you could put that on one large oil tanker. So we are a business that uses around about 300 million tonnes of aviation fuel per year. We did in 2019. It feels like we are starting to recover quite quickly now, so hopefully I think the industry will start to grow again. I think where some of the gaps have been is there's a lot of, I think, been a lot of optimism around the industry, but to scale up that size of production to actually start to be significant, and I think there are good opportunities to do that. It takes a huge amount of investment, but also you've got to start thinking about both the technology roadmap and the feedstock roadmap, and understanding then how do you bring this into the supply chain. I think the opportunities are there to do this. I think the 10% ambition by 2030 is actually achievable, but a lot needs to happen quickly. We're in 2022 now. And I think if we look at projects announced around the world, we will probably get to about maybe 10 million tonnes at the moment, maybe slightly higher. We need to go faster as an industry, but we need clarity from the policymakers and the regulators. We also need some of those incentives. This is expensive. So for airlines who are in recovery from COVID, they'll need to think about how they manage this for their customers. But there's also a piece around customer education. I think many corporates, as part of their net zero own targets, will need to decarbonise staff travel, cargo and logistics. And I think actually that's a rich area the industry needs to focus on. If you think about the companies now, I think it's over 3,000 companies have signed up to net zero by 2050 and potentially interim targets, thinking about how we go faster to help those companies. And that's actually the space we need to think about educating and helping both the corporate and the flying passengers understand what the opportunity is with SAF. A long way to go. We can get there. Lots to do in investment space. Projects need to get going now because often it takes you 4 or 5 years to build these projects. So we need to be building at scale in the key economies, particularly Europe, North America, but those early projects in Asia as well to really get to that 10% by 2030. So a lot to do and a lot to think about.
A lot to do, definitely, but we've heard education, technology, feedstocks. Thank you. And Christoph, I'm going to turn now to you now, because you're making us imagine a world where CO2 is our feedstock and where we actually refine CO2 with green hydrogen to make SAF. It was only 6 months ago when you integrated the first direct air capture and storage plant in Iceland. And also yesterday, the IPCC report was highlighting the importance of scaling direct air capture technologies. So can you please maybe walk us a bit through the potential of the AC technologies in SAF? So how can it impact SAF? How can DAC contribute to decarbonize aviation?
Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation, Laia. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Perfect. Yeah. So many of the right things have been said. Right. It's 10% is an ambitious statement. We need to scale, as Brian said. But the good news is the technologies have been demonstrated. So behind me, you see the world's largest direct air capture plant that we have opened in September of last year. And we also have demonstrated e-fuels back in 2018. And the process is, as you said, we use CO2 that we capture from the air, and we can combine it with green hydrogen to then make hydrocarbon chains and basically to make a drop-in fuel that not only closes the carbon cycle. So once the fuel is burned, the CO2 is re-emitted into the air, but also which burns a lot cleaner. And as we have no alternative than hydrocarbon chains in aviation, or at least in long-distance passenger aviation, we really need liquid fuels. And this technology gives you the opportunity to, I would say, defossilize, right? To have these hydrocarbon chains independent from fossil fuels and just use renewable energy to produce them. It will be a bit more expensive, that's for sure. But again, the technology is there. And maybe with this, I'm proud to announce that we, an hour ago, announced our latest funding round, and we just received $650 million US. The name of the game is Scale Up, and we have completed another milestone in that direction. Very happy about this.
Thanks, Christoph, and congratulations on the last investment round. I'll turn out to you, Georgia, now, because the UK government is investing in the construction of new SAF plants and also investing in R&D of new technology pathways in order to bring down the production cost. So can you speak us a bit more about what policies can enable the transition? Or in Greta words, if we want to stop the blah, 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 and we really have more ambition and we want to do more and more quickly, what can we do?
Yeah, sure, and thank you very much for having me. So I'll start building on what Brian was saying, which is obviously building SAF plants and scaling up technology is incredibly challenging, but our 10% SAF by 2030 ambition is possibly achievable, and we hope that the policies that we're introducing can help to scale up the sector. And as you heard from Minister Courts actually earlier today, the government is very committed to building a UK SAF industry. We want the UK to be world leader, and we want to obviously bring about the carbon savings that SAF as a technology can bring, but also focus on the green jobs and the investment opportunities that SAF as a technology can deliver. And that's something which for our ministers and for the Prime Minister, obviously, it is incredibly important. So how is the program that we're trying to introduce and the program that we're designing going to help? We're trying to tackle some of the challenges we heard about today, both on the demand side of things and on the supply side of things. And I'll just go through some of the policies that we're introducing. So we're working on a SAF mandate, so a blending mandate to scale up the SAF sector, to both support the early market, but also to give a long-term signal when it comes to the role that we believe as a government SAF will play in decarbonizing aviation. We're working through some of the practicalities, and we're working with industry to refine exactly our approach to the SAF blending mandate, and we hope to release some further information on how the scheme is going to operate soon. We're working with funding, obviously. It is important to support the supply and the production of SAF as well. So indeed going through that kind of technology development and commercialization of SAF plants. So we've got funding in place. Our latest round is £50 million to support Green Fuels, Green Skies projects. So we've got 8 projects developing at the moment with a wide range of technologies actually being trialed and being tested to commercialize the sector. We're very keen to make sure that these companies can progress to full commercialization, and that's why as part of the spending review and the net zero strategy announcement in October actually last year, we announced that we're going to boost the program with an additional £180 million funding. So we're working at the moment to design this new set of funding. We're trying to understand exactly what kind of eligibility criteria we could use to foster innovation, but equally to scale up the SAF industry in the UK. As part of this funding, we've got some money as well for a clearinghouse proposal, so to support the fuel testing and innovation. We've already discussed earlier today how important it is to move towards 100% SAF blends to maximize actually the opportunities in terms of carbon savings that SAF can deliver, but also to support the development of new innovative pathways that can complement what we have already today. So we hope to set out in a bit more detail how the UK clearinghouse is going to work in the next few months, building on the existing fuel testing and certification processes as well. Obviously, all of these package of work aims very much to attract private investment into the sector and to make sure that the SAF plants developing in the UK can progress to the next stage. So working with the financial community is going to be key, and that's why the Prime Minister last year launched the Breakthrough Energy Catalyst Programme with Breakthrough Energy indeed to attract investment into the sector, into the SAF plants developing in the UK, but also in other alternative technologies such as direct air capture and green hydrogen, which we heard are going to be quite important for the SAF industry as well. So if we want to do more, there's already a lot happening, and it's great to see the interest from the aviation industry and the willingness to decarbonize, which is something that the government really shares. So if we want to do more, we need to engage with industry. We have the Jet Zero Council in place, and you'll hear about that, I think, tomorrow. But equally, we're trying to understand a bit more what kind of additional policies could be possibly introduced. There are many different views in industry. There are many different calls, for example, for additional policy interventions that could stabilize the revenues of plants. So we're doing some internal work at the moment to try to explore a bit more how faster we can do and how best we can introduce possibly additional policies that could support the sector. So I started a year and a half ago in this position. It was just a team of 2, and by the end of April, we're going to have 12 people in post, and the team is expanding even further. So there's a lot going on at the moment, and we hope to continue to progress this policy and take it to the next level. And again, there's so much work happening, and it's great to be here today to talk about it.
Thank you so much. Exciting to see how many things are going on. And Jonathan Wood from Neste, I'll turn out to you now as one of the only SAF producers today. There seems to be this general agreement that if we manage to scale up SAF, the production cost is gonna calm down. But can you speak us a bit about what is the current level of SAF produced nowadays? And is it really going to be feasible to scale up to the level that is needed for the targets that we've set?
Thank you, Laia, and glad to be here to talk and contribute to this debate, because we definitely have to move into action. And I think this panel has already started to indicate there is quite a lot of action going on, and Neste is certainly part of that. I joined Neste at the beginning of 2020, and that was part of the setup of a new renewable aviation business unit focused on bringing renewable aviation fuel, or SAF, to market and reducing the emissions. And Neste, as I think you all know, has transformed itself over the last 10-15 years to become a real expert in terms of taking waste materials and recycling them in a true circular economy fashion to reduce emissions. Neste's already got significant expertise, therefore, in bringing projects, scaling up projects, securing the supply chain of feedstocks and bringing to market, firstly in the renewable road transportation sector, and now we're scaling up for aviation and indeed also for renewable chemical feedstocks. So we're already reducing emissions for our customers by over 10 million tonnes per annum, and we've got a target to get to a reduction in our customer emissions of 20 million tonnes by 2030. And indeed, our incentives, talking about incentives in the market, my personal incentives are driven by how much we reduce emissions for our customers. So where are we at right now? As Brian mentioned, the big picture in terms of the volume that's required of aviation fuel in a normal year of over 300 million tonnes. 200,000 tonnes, roughly speaking, being produced today. Neste has a production capacity, as we speak today, of a bit over 100,000 tonnes. But we are investing today. In the last two and a half years, we've made decisions, and we're now executing those decisions to bring on new production capacity in Singapore, so in Asia, in Europe, at Rotterdam. We have our existing facility in Finland, and we also recently announced new investment in North America. So we are already moving our renewable fuels production capacity from 3 million tonnes today to close to 6 million tonnes by the end of next year. And SAF production capacity will grow from 100,000 tonnes to 1.5 million tonnes next year, production capacity. So we're already moving the ball forward. It's going to require many other players as well to get to the 20 to 30 tonnes that we need to, million tonnes that we need to get to by 2030. But that's already a very significant contribution, and there's more in the pipeline. So that's the known technology that we know we can scale up. We know we can get the waste material feedstocks and bring those up and running and bring to market. We're also in parallel then looking at additional, the newer, less technically ready production technologies using other bio-based waste materials, municipal solid waste, lignocellulosic waste materials from agricultural forestry, and then ultimately also the power-to-liquid green hydrogen-based production methods. So we see this as a layered cake, if you like. We've got the foundation, we know how to scale up, and we are scaling up the heifer-based SAF, and we'll then bring on, over the course of the 2020s and early 2030s, the other production technologies.
Super, thank you so much. And I'll move on to Brian now. We have two Brians in this panel to confuse us, but Brian Yudko from Boeing. Brian, Boeing announced its effort to make all the fleet SAF compatible by 2030, and they're building partnerships with various SAF producers. Can you tell us a bit more about what is your role? What is the role of Boeing in decarbonizing aviation when it comes to SAF, but also beyond SAF?
Yeah. Thanks for the opportunity. It's great to be here, and you'll actually hear from me twice today, because at Boeing, the sustainable fuels are a really critical part of decarbonizing aviation and meeting the 2050 goals. We're also working on advanced technologies, and we'll talk about this later on the electric and hydrogen panel. But we're all saying the word scale up. And so I thought maybe what I could do is try to put that scale up concept for SAF into context, grounded in some numbers, and then I'll talk a bit about what we're doing. So I like to think in terms of US gallons, not because I'm American, but because it's a nice round number. So pre-pandemic, about 100 million US gallons was the demand for global aviation. So 100 million gallons. And 0.1% of that, famously, as we've talked about today, has been sustainable fuels. So 0.1%. And this is where I think the percentages can be deceiving as it relates to scaling up and the challenges that are really in front of us. So I like to think in terms of 10xing 3 times. So 1%, so 10xing the total production, the total SAF production to 1% by 2025. The accounting that we've done of the existing production facilities that are in place and those that are planned makes us believe that we can get to that 1 to 2% number. So that's 10xing once, so thinking in terms of multiples. To get to that 10% number in 2030, that requires 100x change in the amount of sustainable fuels production. So 0.1% to 10% sounds like a small number. We're talking about 100xing in industrial base. So 100x by 2030. And then another 10x on top of that by 2050. So that's 1,000x. Now, when we look at Boeing, when we look at the advanced technology pathways that we have and some of the roadmaps that you just saw on the previous panel, the discussion is frequently around, well, can we take that 100% SAF by 2050, the need there, and can we start to take off the top by having electric and hydrogen and some of the other things so we could reduce that to maybe, let's say, like 80%. And that sounds much more achievable, 80% versus 20%. But when you do the math and you think in terms of multiples, that 80%, hopefully you're still with me, is an 800x increase, right? Because we're coming off of a base of 0.1%. So we would, again, 10x by 2050, another 10x by 2030. And if we only had to get to another 8x after that, that would take us to 800x. The point being, there is no solution to meeting 2050 goals that doesn't involve a massive scale up. Even if you think you could take 20%, 30%, 40% in some of the most aggressive technology roadmaps off the top, that's going to require us to scale up still hundreds of times the total production. So what are we doing? So what we're doing is we're making our airplanes so that they will be certified to use 100% SAF by 2030. And we know that this is possible. We've been flying airplanes. We flew the first flight in 2018 on 100% sustainable fuels. That's a demonstration flight and in an experimental aircraft. The key now is going to be to certify those aircraft, to work with the FAA, with the ASA, with the ASTM, to make sure that those aircraft are certified by the time that the production capacity comes online. We're also making investments. So we've been investing. We recently announced an investment in Sky Energy, a company that's working with the ATJ pathway using municipal solid waste as one of the feedstocks. We're not a fuel producer, but what we're trying to do is to place incentives or place investments rather that help to catalyze the market to get to those multiple 100x scale-ups. We're also doing R&D with folks like NASA and MIT and others on the different emissions impacts of different kinds of SAF. And the last thing is we're purchasing ourselves. So we are not an airline, but we actually consume a lot of fuel ourselves. So recently we announced a 2 million US gallon purchase of sustainable fuel. So those are some of the things that we're doing. But I think it's just critically important when we talk about scaling up to think about it is not a choice. So I'm a technology developer myself, and I am very aggressive about wanting us to develop advanced technologies. But if we want to meet those goals, there is no choice. We must scale up multiple 100x and then choose your favorite number from there. It's either going to be 800x or 1,000x, but it's going to be a really big number if we're going to meet those goals.
Thank you very much, Brian. It's been very illustrative to use all these numbers. I'm sure we're all going to remember them. It's also been a bit scary to hear so many zeros and X. But Jean-Baptiste, hello. I'm going to turn on to you now.
Right.
Safran is progressing the use of SAF in helicopter engines. Can you walk us a bit? What is the current findings, barriers that you're encountering, and how far are we from 100% certification?
Okay, that's two questions, in fact. But basically, we follow the same path as Boeing or Airbus or the other engine manufacturers. So where we are today, we try to enable, and that's our DNA, in fact. And also, we have a new job, which is to promote. And with this new job, we have new friends, basically, Neste, Total, Shell, and so on. So on the 50%, I think we all understand, enable is ticked. And so there we are really promoting and sometimes training operators. Helicopter operators are very small. And so they don't have all the knowledge. And so generally we team with them, and that goes from knowing the basic of SAF to basically up to go in flights and make demonstration so that we lead the industry. We also team with our new friends there because we need to understand basically the realities they are facing. I think Brian expressed it perfectly. The number of X for the scaling up is just huge. And those guys are facing their own challenges. And on the other side, they also need to listen to our voice and what is our expectations and basically how we can better work together. So we spend a lot of time for that. We flew with operators last year. It was ADAC. We flew also in the UK with the MOD on a 149. It was just before the winter. And where we invest the most basically as a partnership with the energy supplier or the SAF, I would say suppliers, because as it was just expressed in the previous roundtable, I think it was Jan from Shell, the main challenges are not technical for the engine side or even for the fuel system within the aircraft. It is a scaling up, and so it is a cost and the availability of the SAF. So for the cost, I agreed with Shell. We believe that the gap will remain. And so there we try to lead by example. And it's what we do. Boeing is doing. We are doing in the UK, for example, since the end of last year, all our operations in our test cells for engines, we are running with up to 50% SAF. It is supplied by Neste. We do the same in France on a lower scale because it's very costly. We do that with Total Energies. So there, basically, we really try to understand what are the challenges from the supply side. On the availability, we invest in studies, and we also invest in companies. Sky Energy for Boeing, we invested in Eneratech recently, which is a startup for power to liquids or e-fuels, so that we understand the, I would say, not the math, but the physics behind, so that we understand what will be the future availabilities and what will be the cost in the future. To get to your second question, the 100%. Basically, we fly. We flew on a helicopter last year. We keep flying 100%. But so there, I will try to be a little more, I would say, precise. So a SAF, I will assume that what we talk about is a biofuel. So coming from the biomass, let's say residues, or from electricity through what Climeworks just explained, having green hydrogen and then direct air capture, and then we have a power to liquids or e-fuel. I like e-fuels because E for electricity is easy to remember, at least for me. So once we have that, we have two possibilities, what we call the drop-in for the 100% or the non-drop-in. Basically, when we say we are compatible with 100% SAF, it's because we go on a drop-in. SAF is sustainable aviation fuel. The S could be for synthetic. It's man-made, basically. So we can adapt. And let's say, for example, we can add aromatics. And so we have a SAF, which is basically meeting the standards of the existing Jet A1, if I make it simple. So it's very easy for industry, I mean, airframers, engine manufacturers, to say, okay, we are committed to fly 100% because the SAF will be adapted. And it's fine, it's okay. There is also another way, which is called non-drop-in, and in that way, we try to be pure. So why do we want to be pure, or do we wish we could be pure? It's because typically we would have no aromatics in the SAF, which means we have no soot, or less soot. We have fewer particles, and so that will play on the contrails formation. And so we could have a double win. But there, the path is longer, that will need further works. We have a lot of research projects at Safran for that, and we expect to better understand by 2030, the same time frame, is it worth going in that direction? So in any case, our industry is fine with 100% SAF. If it is a drop-in, I will tell you that in a year and a half, we are there, and so we'll keep flying. If it is on a non-drop-in, it will take multiple years. We need to evaluate, we need to keep working, because our main objective is that it is safe to fly. And SAF are safe, and so we need to make sure that they keep and remain safe for our industry. So this is what I could say first.
Thank you so much. It seems clear from all these interventions that stakeholders will need to do a choreography between demand, supply, private-public partnerships with businesses, but also with financial institutions in order to unlock all the investment that is needed to ultimately convert this green premium into a green bonus, if you want, just as we saw with wind and solar a few years ago. I would like to ask to the group an additional question, because SAF is normally criticized for being something very focused in Europe or the US. How can we make it available at the global level?
To start, I mean, I think at the global level, there does need to be a bigger push. I think the previous panel talked a lot about what a KO can be doing in terms of a global aspiration, and actually stop talking about aspirations and start talking about intermediate targets and actually driving the industry. The problem with long-term aspirational goals, they become aspirational. I'd like to win the lottery one day. I'm very aspiring to that, but it may not happen. So we need to be starting to think about the intermediate targets. I think it's important that the KO and the CORSIA scheme starts to evolve and look to some of those global targets. And actually, we are seeing more governments and more airlines, more parts of the ecosphere starting to think about, particularly in other parts of the world, the Middle East, Asia, thinking about a SAF roadmap and a SAF trajectory. We're seeing more governments getting into that space. We think it's important to be getting SAF into different markets. We've recently done some SAF with Neste into Singapore as part of our wider set of projects there. We think it's important that every part of the world and those leading airlines use SAF and show that it is more widely available. But I think it's really critical to think about what are some of the help that will be needed for some parts of the world, because again, the various technologies, feedstock choices will be different for different parts of the world. We need as an industry to come together to say, look, there's different things can work in different parts of the world, and actually then be able to demonstrate what can be achievable. And I think if we can do that, we'll get a bigger buy-in with customers, and we'll start to see a much greater, more substantial piece of demand that starts to appear. And we are seeing, I think, the early parts of that today, which is good to see.
One of the go ahead.
Sorry, if I may just add. We as Neste are obviously, as I mentioned earlier, investing in Singapore, so that's going to be a production centre, and I'm sure there'll be other investors there in due course. But also from a policy point of view, I would say, yes, we need at a global level to ensure that the aviation industry doesn't have dislocation or rather has an equal playing field. As I said earlier, that's one of the things that ICAO can push for, and I certainly agree with having intermediate goals for 2030. But don't underestimate also the positive influence that Europe and the UK is having on policy discussions. In places like Australia and New Zealand, they're talking about setting up Jet Zero Council-like consultation forums to get the input to start the ball rolling and commit to also targets there as well. So also on the policy side, yes, we need to be careful that we don't have different regions with different goals and targets. But on the other side of the coin, taking a lead can actually move the playing field up for everybody.
So less aspiration and more action in the near to midterm. Additional comments, Brian? You wanted to say something?
Yeah,
Speak over.
Sure.
Sorry, and then I'll go to Giorgio.
Yeah, I did want to say I totally agree with that. I think actually the UK. What's going on with the Jet Zero Council, the strategies, the potential upcoming regulations with respect to sustainable fuels show how the UK can lead the world in thinking in terms of these innovative ways to both incentivize, but also to work with industry to really scale this. To get back to your question with respect to the global opportunity, we actually have projects right now on 6 continents, regions all over the world right now to develop, and again, we're not a fuel company, but what we're trying to do is to step in and help to incentivize. And the way we're thinking about that, the way I like to think about sustainable fuels as a technology is that it's a standard interface to the airplane in the way that we have APIs and software, and that we know how to talk to different elements of software. This is a standard interface to the airplane. And what's really neat about that is that different countries and regions around the world can all of a sudden become fuel and energy producers based on the feedstocks that they have available to them in their particular region, as long as that feedstock can be converted in a sustainable way into that standard interface to get onto the airplane. So that means that, leveraging geothermal in Iceland, leveraging solar in the Middle East, leveraging different kinds of bio-based feedstocks in the regions that are available. I think what's really interesting about sustainable fuels, again, as a technology, is thinking about this sort of fractured feedstock potential, converting that all into that standard interface, and creating more energy producers all around the world to contribute ultimately to scaling up in the way that I talked about before.
Thanks. I like thinking about sustainable aviation as a potential catalyzer for economic growth. Giorgio wanted to complement that.
Yes, very quickly. But many countries are actually reaching out to us to say, okay, how do we start about, going about SAF? How can we start producing stuff in our country as well? So we're doing quite a lot of work with them as well. So the minister earlier today mentioned the Climate Ambition Coalition, in particular strengthening the work in ICAO. So obviously there is ICAO, and the UK government is very committed to strengthening the ambition and agree a long-term goal. But on SAF specifically, we work with the World Economic Forum, the Clean Skies for Tomorrow initiative, and all of the SAF ambassadors event we organize for COP. So working with other countries, the United Arab Emirates, Kenya, Singapore, the Netherlands as well, trying to basically provide a sort of toolkit or a footprint that other countries could actually follow in order to scale up the SAF industry. So there is a lot in terms of policy knowledge that we can share with others, and other countries are indeed reaching out to get a sense of how best we can help them. So UK policy is going to be beneficial to strengthening the UK industry and building a SAF industry here, but also to lead the way and showing others what kind of opportunities are around SAF and how we can help shaping and influencing other countries as well.
Super. Thank you. Thank you very much. And before going to close the panel, I would like to ask each of you, please, to highlight what do you think has been the most interesting point of discussion. Christoph, I would like to start with you, please. Are you more optimistic after today's discussion?
Yeah, for me, I think the 1,000 or 800xing has been the most interesting point, and it's a similar approach we are having on the carbon removal side, right? Our two legs, we stand on our e-fuels and permanent carbon removal, and it's the same story over there. And we understand this very well, and we would say it's ambitious but possible, so that makes me very optimistic.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I'll switch to you, Brian, on my left. What was the key point of the discussion for you?
For me, I think it's the global conversation that's now happening in SAF. I think that's really changed a lot in the last 2 years, and I see that in more places. We're seeing more of a pull. I think that pull's important. We're seeing more of a policy conversation developing everywhere. That's also important. And I think over time, what will happen is you will see more SAF coming to market. So we have to be optimistic in that. But I think we've now got some of the right forums and the right conversations. I think as an industry, though, we need to be pushing for going as fast as we can and really starting to make it very clear that this is needed, and very clear to policymakers we need that help as well.
Very important to help to democratize the use of SAF and production of SAF. Jean-Baptiste, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think basically it's the roundtable you have today. As Brian said, 2 years ago, we were not talking to each other. So when I look at SAF, we have 4 challenges. The technical one, it's our DNA, so we know how to do it, how to handle it, it's fine. Number 2, which perhaps is not that easy, is the regulations. But we have one around the table, but because there are multiple regulations in Europe, in UK, in Norway, in United States, Asia will come, so we need to understand and so on, but at least there is a trigger there, and it's fine. And the last 2 are the availabilities, and this one, I believe, is short, medium, and long term, with lots of discussion, with the opportunities to have multiple feedstock worldwide, but for sure, feedstock are not infinite. And I think this morning we mentioned for the HEFA, we all have HEFA today because it's used cooking oil, but used cooking oil is a used cooking oil, and we don't eat fries every day. So obviously there is a limit, and basically there will be those kind of examples for every feedstock. And the other one is the cost, and with the multipliers for the capex, that we'll have to face, and the cost for the airlines and the operators on the OPEX on that side. And at least we have a target. Now it's 2030. For me, it's a significant date, because at that time we will have 10% of SAF. And 10% of SAF means 12 plus 20, 25% on the fuel bill for the industry. And so we will see how the volume is coming and how the industry is behaving. And so that's important. So for me, it's already wonderful that everybody is here around the table, because we need to have that holistic approach to understand where we're going.
Thank you. Yeah, we don't eat rice every day. But great point on that the stakeholders along the value chain are now connected and ready to move forward together. Giorgio?
So some very key takeaways from my side, and more widely, I think it's been very, very interesting to see the level of ambition and the enthusiasm that different members of the supply chain are actually bringing to the conversation. And maybe building on what Jean-Baptiste was saying right now, which is the passenger element as well. So we obviously want to understand what the implication for passengers of this are going to be, but also how best we can bring passengers into the conversation. And there is a lot, for example, that I'm seeing when talking to people in terms of actually not understanding basically what SAF is, or the economic advantages or the environmental advantages as well. So there is a lot on, I think, knowledge and the comms element that we need to think about, also to make sure that the advantages of SAF are clear, but also some of the challenges that SAF cannot overcome are clear. And that was something that emerged in the previous panel. So just a couple of thoughts from my side.
Thank you very much. Brian?
That looked like a double point there, sorry. I think for me, at least so far today, the zeitgeist has changed a bit from pre-pandemic. And I can't quite tell exactly why that's happened, and the world has sort of rallied around sustainability coming out of the pandemic. But it's definitely happened in a really interesting way. And so it's no longer just that there are folks like myself and research institutions and companies saying, hey, this is important and these are the levers that we have to go do this, and trying to convince people. Now we have some really innovative ways to incentivize via policy mechanisms, via some of the institutions that are coming together. We're also seeing entrepreneurship. So, one way to think about the 800x or 1000x challenge that I laid out there is, boy, that's daunting. That sounds scary. The other way to think about that is, what an opportunity. I can't tell you the amount of times I've sat at my desk and said, maybe I should go start a SAF company. I haven't done that. I'm not going to do that. But I think there's real opportunity there. And I think that you're starting to see that. You're starting to see capital arrive. Now that policy mandates and incentives are coming into place, you're starting to see the entrepreneurship community show up. You're starting to see development. That, to me, are the markers of this will be real. And there's a long way between here and 2050, but I'm optimistic about the road ahead. There's a lot of work to do, but these are great. You pointed out in the beginning, actually, these are great opportunistic moments to create jobs, to transform the industry. So I'm incredibly optimistic, and I like that the zeitgeist has changed.
I agree with your optimism. Thanks. Yeah. And finally, Jonathan, please.
Well, I think, Laia, you laid it out very well at the start, prior to this panel, but I think we now can see multiple different ways of getting to where we need to get to. Some are probable and shorter term, some are more aspirational and longer term. We need to make sure that the perfect doesn't get in the way of the good. And so yes, we need a rules framework within which we work so that we don't disadvantage particular regions, but equally we need to have a set of guidelines that gives us the flexibility to move forward. So let's not try and get the perfect answer. Let's know where we're going. Let's set the framework and always adjust it in due course. And feedstocks for me is a classic example, and the production technologies that are linked with them a classic example. Let's not try and already define what we don't know about in 10 years' time, but rather let's make sure we've got the framework to move forward at pace now, secure the investments that are needed, and the further research that's needed to deliver both what we know we can deliver in the 2020s and scale up, and also develop the solution to the 2030s and beyond.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think in today's panel we've been able to see that stakeholders from fuel producers to policymakers and OEMs are willing, ready, and committed to make it happen and to spur action. So I think this is the take-home message for today's session. Thank you very much, and please join me in thanking these excellent panelists.